Hey folks, your host of the Thriller Zone, Dave Temple here with some exciting news. We are this close to launching Season 9. Can you believe it? In just 1 month, we're going to hit the milestone of 4 years, and I could not be happier to have shared this journey with you. So thank you. Now, as we launch Season 9, you're in for a real treat when we host a number of very special guests, many of whom you have never seen on this show before. Let's just say, if you're in the business of writing thriller, mystery, and suspense fiction, you're going to be wowed as we chat with some of the biggest names in this business. So go ahead, set aside some time in your podcast calendars to help us launch Season 9 of The Thriller Zone, Thursday, June 19th. And one more thing, if you have a thrilling book, fiction or non, coming out later this summer or early fall, and you would like to be considered as a guest on the show, be sure to give us all of your information sooner than later, as we tend to book about 3 months in advance. It's real easy. Go to thethrillerzone.com/register. Remember the word register. So once again, that's thethrillerzone.com/register. All right, do that, and we'll be talking soon as we launch Season 9 of The Thriller Zone. On today's 228th episode of The Thriller Zone, it's what I'm calling a double shot of thrill-seeking behavior from your good friend and podcast host, Dave Temple. Hello there. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, today's show is a Thursday throwback. Why do you ask? 2 reasons. It's Memorial Day weekend and, well, frankly, Daddy needs to take a break. You see, Tammy and I have been, as my late mother used to say, we've been burning the candle on both ends and it's thin enough to skate on. Now, I never really fully understood that saying, but you get the idea. So yeah, the two temples are taking a break this week. The second reason, as I was reflecting upon past shows I really enjoyed, I thought, hey, I'm going to go back to last year's Memorial Day weekend show where I found Mr. Jon Katzenbach talking about his dark thriller, Jack's Boys. Then I thought, well, wait a minute. What if we were to go back 2 years? And that brought me to Matthew Quirk, the creator of The Night Agent, and where we talked about his riveting thriller, Inside Threat. So, what does it mean? Well, this means for your long Memorial Day holiday weekend, here in the States anyway, you're about to enjoy a twofer Thursday, aka Thriller Double Shot, with two giants of thriller fiction, Jon Katzenbach and Matthew Quirk. So kick back in your lawn chair, stretch out on your hammock, pull out a cool beverage or two, unless of course you're driving to see family, and enjoy two hits in one here on The Thriller Zone. Let's get into The Thriller Zone with Jon Katzenbach. Well, I think we are officially warmed up. Welcome to The Thriller Zone, Jon Katzenbach. It is so nice to have you here.
It's my pleasure. Absolutely.
Look at this bad boy.
Yes.
Jack's Boys. When I miss a day at the gym, I just grab your book and I do a couple of overhead presses and it really works me well.
David, it is longer than I typically write. When you sit down, you realize you've got this story and then you get way into it and you realize, you're not there yet. So you start rowing faster, right? And I'm pretty pleased with this book, frankly.
You should be. It's 608 pages of tasty goodness.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you. Really, actually, what you're talking about is the nature of story.
Yes.
And one of the things that sort of, that especially in the world of thrillers, you worry about is not being complete and not being sort of psychologically attuned to every character so that when you get to the end, no one's saying, well, whatever happened to Ralph back there?
Right.
I really worry about these things far more than anyone should worry about them.
Well, I think you make a really interesting point, and I have learned this lately, and it's a phrase that says something to the effect of trust the reader to recall a lot of that stuff. Because I was kind of like, well, I need to remind them all along. No, David, you don't need to remind them. They give them credit. They know who's what and where.
Frankly, David, most readers are smarter than I at remembering all that stuff. I think that is a testimonial to the sophistication that most thriller readers have.
Yeah.
About plot, story, and character, which are, the sort of the triumvirate that we're all working under.
Yeah, the meat and potatoes of it.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to dive into Jack's Boys, of course, but I want to do this. I want to take a little bit of a moment and talk about backstory or prologue, if you will. I mean, let's talk about you. I want to get to know you because I remember your name years ago. I have lost touch with you over the years. I remember, oh, Jon Katzenbach. Yeah, years ago, like the movies. And then we're going to get to this in a minute. And I'm going to mention a couple of movies. And I'm like, well, I know those movies very well. So it's so funny that I feel like I've known you for, well, one of your movies came out, the 85, a Mean Season. I want to say like 85, 86.
Yeah, a little earlier, 82.
82,
81
okay.
or 82.
I want to know, you were a criminal court reporter at both the Miami Herald and the News. How did your work there as a reporter influence your eventual fiction writing?
I always loved that particular inquiry.
Okay.
That because I went to newspapers because I wanted to be able to write fiction, but I didn't know anything.
Oh, wow.
And so I went to newspapers to learn about the world. As a journalist, every day I considered it like going to the theater, because what I would see and what I would hear would register, and in some kind of great psychological Freudian mix of things, you hear things and pull them out later, and install them into the books. The value in all of that is it's immense, because you see people in all forms of good, bad, and evil. That became the template or the undercurrent for just about everything I've written.
I so love the way you put that, because you really went to school at the paper to learn the craft that you eventually turn into a real career.
Well, my wife often says that I learned everything I needed to know about psychopathology in prep school. But but the fact of the matter is, it's really those days as a newspaper reporter, and starting in New Jersey and then down in Miami. I was in Miami at the world's greatest time to be a reporter. I mean, there were just everything that was crazy and weird and wonderful happened all at once. And heck, I found a dead body once. So I mean,
Wait. Stop the presses. What were you doing, and where did you find said body?
I was working for the Herald. I had a couple of days off, so I was jogging through our neighborhood in Coral Gables, which is absolutely now it's like as fancy as you can get.
Oh yeah.
And I'm jogging along, David, and I look into this empty lot, and there is a body out there. So I walked over, and this was at the height of the drug wars, and the guy wearing a leather Porsche jacket, gold, chains around his neck, Rolex on his wrist, and single gunshot wound to the back of the head. I reached down, felt the carotid artery, and it was cold, and so knocked on a neighbor's door and said, "Please call the police." Now, here's the funny part about this story, right? The police showed up, and I'm waiting there by the body for them, and they come up, and the first patrol car comes up, and two guys get out, and they come over, and they say, "Yeah, it's a dead body." This is what in the prosecutor's office in Dade County they used to call felony littering at that point. And one of the cops looks down at me and says, "Did you see the Rolex?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah." And he just shakes his head like, any damn fool would have reached down there, taken the Rolex, put it in their pocket, and then called the police.
Yeah.
So, that was what Miami was like back then. You name it, it happened in Florida.
What does this say about you that you didn't lift the rollie?
Well, it says that I'm a fundamentally honest guy and not quite as smart as I think I should be.
Nice.
To make this story somewhat serious.
Okay.
it was understanding, you're sitting there as a reporter and you realize how valueless certain lives can be. Mm-hmm. And then for me, I had to say to myself, okay, how am I going to measure that? Remember that sensation, and how is that going to go into a novel at a later point? So there's a great correlation between all these things.
So that visceral, palpable chill, so to speak, of finding a dead body, you translate it into a future story. Can you remember where that story went, where that experience was woven into a story? Can you recall?
I think that there are elements of it, and the sort of callousness that I felt for this, dead drug dealer, mm-hmm. and the cops that showed up and the Rolex. I took that sort of, this where you sort of become a psychopath in that moment. Mm-hmm. And I've installed that in some of in the characters in Jack's Boys.
There are some twisted Nellies in there, that's for sure. We're going to drill down on that in just a second. But I got a two-part question, which I'm kind of famous for. How long were you at these two papers, ballparkish, and were you writing fiction on the side while covering the beat, or were you? Because I got a pretty good idea that you're working long hours, long days in a week. But did you squirrel away some time where you would, inject some of that data that you were gathering while writing, or did you just kind of go, I just need to get this job done, and then later down the road, I'll start the real writing?
I'm glad you asked that. Actually, there's the old saw about every reporter's got a novel in their desk drawer.
Yeah.
Mine was all in my head. And there reached a point where I realized I'd been a reporter for about 11, 12, 13 years, covering all sorts of stuff. And I realized that if I didn't take the time and try to write a novel at that point, that the opportunity might slide past. So I actually took I had to get a new apartment. I was with my soon-to-be wife, and we had to get a new apartment. And this guy had this wonderful old Gables apartment in a building that he was intending to tear down eventually. So he said to us, he said, you guys can have the apartment. Is $140 a month enough? And it was like getting a grant. I mean, a MacArthur grant, a Genius grant.
Sure.
I said, yes, we can pay that. And so about the next day, I went into the paper and I said, I'm going to take a leave of absence. Shortly before then, I had that sort of aha conversation with my soon-to-be wife, where she had asked me how had things gone that day at the newspaper. And I said, well, everything was okay. I got a good story or two. But, I got half dozen phone calls from the jail. Those guys always call up and say, I didn't do it. Right. And I said, and they all did. Yeah. And I said, wouldn't it be more interesting if somebody called and said, I did do it?
Yeah.
And that became, I went, and that became the basis for my very first novel. Which is, a reporter gets a call from a guy saying, let me explain why I killed that person.
Wow. And what's the name of that one?
That was in the heat of the summer.
Oh,
and it became filmed as The Mean Season with Kurt Russell.
And Merrill Hemingway, yeah.
Yeah. As long as I'm rambling on, let me give you one funny story about that.
Please, ramble away.
The subplot in that was Vietnam. Mm-hmm. This guy was a vet and Vietnam vet. And when it came to the film people, the producer, David Foster, called me up and said, Vietnam's been done. We got to lose Vietnam. And I, of course, said, well, we lost it once in real life. We can lose it again, I guess. But anyway, time passes and they're filming the big final scene. And they're out in the Everglades and there's these SWAT teams running around and helicopters going up overhead. And David turns to me and he goes, oh, I get it. Helicopters, SWAT teams, jungle. It's Vietnam. And I go, yeah, it's a little late now, right? But that's pretty much what I was trying to get at, right? And so there you have. I mean, that's that whole thing. But it was actually a wonderful moment. But that was my first book.
Yeah, I love stories like that. And the mean season, if I remember correctly, because I used to have friends that lived in that part of the country when I was in college, and I think it was when the storm would roll in, it would be like those really miserable thunderstorms, and you think, oh, good, it's going to crack the heat and it's going to cool off. But what happens is it just saturated and made it worse, and it never got cooler, and so the nights were miserable. Isn't that loosely?
That is absolutely the way it is. And, without being too political here, climate change has made it worse.
What? Wait.
Yeah. Yeah. No, my son and daughter-in-law live in Miami, and it was, the heat index was well over 100 in May.
Yeah.
So I mean, so there you have it.
Yeah, my parents-in-law live in South Beach, and they're always talking about, every time I go down, the mosquitoes for some reason love me. They eat me up like mad. And then the water downtown, the water table is rising, so downtown loves to have a little bit of flooding from time to time. And we have this running joke of, if you can't afford beachfront property, just wait a few months, years, because if you're just inside of town, you'll have it.
They a couple of years ago, during one of the big storms, water was washing up onto Biscayne Boulevard in downtown Miami, and it was a big shark there, just sitting on the road. But that's sort of typical. I mean, Florida. In general, just when you think it can't get crazier, trust me, it does. In the writing point of view, you had to be careful, because the reality in South Florida was so bizarre, that, you would try to write some of those. If you tried to write those sequences into a novel, all of the readers would go, oh, don't be ridiculous. That could never happen, but it did.
And some of that was called Miami Vice.
Yeah, exactly. My favorite Miami Vice story. This is a very simple one.
Sure.
It was, Michael Mann, the first year, they had a Ferrari, right? That Don Johnson, would drive around in.
Yeah.
And the first year, they didn't think the show was going to be a hit. So they got one of those kits. It was a Corvette underneath and just a Ferrari body put on top, very cheap, right?
Yeah.
The second year, Don Johnson goes, real Ferrari.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's Hollywood, right?
Yeah. I can hear those drums that start the soundtrack, and I see those graphics and the pink flamingos like it was yesterday. And that was, oh my goodness, how many, is that 40?
Oh, it's got to be 40 years ago.
Oh my God.
Mid-'80s, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Michael Mann knew a few things about entertainment.
Yeah, one of the film, directors and producers that I truly admire.
And still,
you know that after Miami Vice, the first show happened, you could not go into a store in Miami and buy an unreconstructed linen suit anywhere. I mean, every drug dealer in town said, "I've got to have that," right? And they were off every shelf, right?
The world of pastels, yeah. And
yes.
And kudos to Michael Mann, because there's a cat who is still swinging for the fence every time I turn around. I mean, Heat 2 this last year. I mean, goodness.
Yes.
All right. I feel like I'm drifting, but you're so engaging. For folks who don't know what lineage from which you come, sure. I want to ask what it was like growing up in the shadow of your father, as some of us know, former U.S. Attorney General Nicholas Katzenbach. I mean, I was reading about him getting caught up, and boy, talking about a guy who had history. He was like on the front row of history for decades.
When you're growing up in a family like that, you're sort of not really aware of it all.
Sure.
Although if you look behind me, you can see the 1964 Bob Kennedy for Senate, bumper sticker that I found in my father's effects when he,
I love it.
There were so many interesting moments in that, and that era. And but the thing that you would take away from it is, and that I did as a growing up, was how much government was there to do good, and how they were all striving to improve, so much of life. And that's, and in particular, I mean, you think of it, my father's most famous moment was, confronting George Wallace in the famous schoolhouse door. Here's the funny story about that. Uh-huh. My dad was, fit and 6'2", and Wallace was a pipsqueak and 5'7.5". And I said to him, I said, Dad, why didn't you just grab him and, move him out of the way like that? And my father said, well, what you can't see in the pictures is that there were about 4 or 5 6'5" Alabama state troopers right behind him. And, I didn't think they would like me grabbing their governor. So that made some sense, I guess.
Yeah.
It was the interesting thing about growing up then was there was so much passion involved.
Yeah.
In that era, because we went from that into Vietnam, into the civil rights, movement, into so much stuff. And it was a fascinating time to be young. Just to make this all about me again.
Yeah, please.
When I came to writing Heart's War, mm-hmm. Which was the novel based on my father's experiences in World War II. That was where I really sort of learned about why he did the things he did when he was in government. Does that make sense to you?
It makes total sense. And I was just letting that sink in. I was thinking he did so much during his career. And I thought, when I read this, I'm like, how powerful that not only did your father leave a legacy that he did, but that you had an opportunity to form an entire novel about him in dedication to him, so to speak. And then to have that on the silver screen, just a double, triple whammy.
Yes, it was. Here's a story that you'll like about this. The studio flew my father, myself, and my then 18, 19-year-old son over to Prague, where they were filming the movie. They were very, thoughtful about everything they did. But at one point early in our visit over there, they took my father and myself and my son into a little screening room. Mm-hmm. And there's Bruce Willis is there, and Colin Farrell is there, and the director is there, and the producers are there. And they said, we want to show you a sequence. And so I said, great, we want to see everything, right? So they showed us a sequence in a boxcar. Uh-huh. Suddenly there are 2 P-51 Mustangs come flying over, and they're just strafing the hell out of this boxcar. And they get out, and there's this incredibly dramatic scene where Linus Roche, who's a wonderful actor, helps organize the men, and they form a POW by the side. All these American soldiers sitting there like that. Wow. And so the 2 P-51s go zooming over and, wave their wings and stop shooting. I mean, they're just blowing the hell out of everything, which is what Hollywood does better than anywhere, right? And anyway, so they show us this sequence, and they're all sort of sitting there, and they say, "What did we think of it?"
Sure.
And I said, "Well, I thought that was pretty darn cool." I mean, I like explosions and I like airplanes and whatnot. Yeah. And my father is sitting there. And he says in his very quiet voice, he says, "Well," he said, "that was very dramatic." And he said, "That's exactly what it's like to be in a boxcar when you suddenly get strafed by your own guys." There's silence in the room. Wow. And I turned to my father and I said, "You had never said to me that happened to you." And he said, "Yes, in our case, it wasn't Mustangs, it was P-38s that came over. And it's the same thing. The guy got out and opened the doors, and we were able to get away like that. But, you're in this boxcar, and there are guys dying right and left, right around you, whatnot." So this is your classic Hollywood moment.
Yeah.
The producer, the director, the stars, they're all they're trying to be respectful of the fact that here my father had been in this moment where people died right next to him. But on the other hand, they got it right. And so there was a lot of very self-congratulatory, oh yeah, this is, thumbs up kind of thing and whatnot, because the old guy said they got it right. And I think that it was interesting for me because I was looking at him and seeing the emotion of that moment on his face, in contrast to the fact that, all the stars and the producers and everybody were overjoyed.
Yeah.
This was a memory for him that was very different.
What a dichotomy of emotions. Yeah, they're thrilled that they got it right, and he's like, "Yeah, I wish you could have been there because it was
right." Exactly, David. Absolutely. Or actually, it would have been, you're lucky you weren't there.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of lucky you're not there, I was reading also that your father was POW, and wasn't he in the camp that they based the movie The Great Escape on?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And in fact, I asked him about that, and I said, did he think about joining the group that was going to go out? And he said he was given the option because he was a longtime prisoner.
Yeah.
And he turned it down. And because he didn't really have confidence that anybody would get away. He, like everybody, he acted as a lookout. And as you know, in The Great Escape, the movie is quite accurate. Mm-hmm. All those guys got shot.
Yeah.
The only inaccurate part of that movie is, of course, the best part is Steve McQueen jumping the fences on a motorcycle doing his own stunts.
I knew you were going to say that.
What an actor. I mean, God, compelling.
Who doesn't love him?
Yeah, exactly. Golly.
Don't even let your classmate Don Winslow get started about his man crush on Steve McQueen.
No, Don and I, we like to have dinner every so often, and all I have to do is sort of say Steve McQueen, and he melts into this puddle of admiration and love, right? Yes. So I mean,
there's a couple of guys throughout history in our age group that we have that affinity for. It probably, Robert Redford, especially during All the President's Men, Steve McQueen during Great Escape or Bullet, for crying out loud.
Oh God, yes.
Don't even get us started about Bullet, because we'll start talking about the car and the chase in San Francisco and
second best car chase scene ever.
And what would be the first?
The French Connection.
Oh, yeah. Down through the
Gene Hackman, on the horn, like that. And,
oh my God,
that was.
I'm convinced if you want to, ladies, if you want to really please your man, get him a weekend full of movies that involve at least a good car chase and a good gun battle. And I'm thinking of like the car chase in French Connection or Bullet, and maybe speaking of Michael Mann, gun battle like Heat, for instance. You can't beat any of those.
No, that sequence where the automatic weapons and the on the street in LA.
Yeah.
I of course now assume that that's every day in Los Angeles is like that. But from my perspective as a novelist, is when you see sequences like that. Mm-hmm. How brilliantly conceived they are. And it's not merely the action, but it is that the underlying psychology of the moment is spot on.
Yeah.
And in a way, I think that you try to bring those almost cinematic qualities to prose in a thriller. And I think that oftentimes, if you're successful, that you create the same excitement for people as both a reader or a viewer in a movie.
Yeah.
Does that make some sense to you?
It makes total sense. And while you were saying that, I was 100% with you, but I also was sitting there going, man, think about all those scenes that were reflective of the time and the cause. And I saw a movie not that long ago that I have now seen too many times. And if you haven't seen it and you want to see a good gun battle plus a great story that is intricately woven, it is Den of Thieves.
Yes.
Boy.
Yes.
They're at
Yes.
the end when they're locked in a traffic jam and they pull out all their
Yes. Again, psychologically sound.
Exactly.
Because you're coming up there and you realize that all hell's about to break loose, but everybody around you is totally innocent.
Yeah.
And I mean that I agree. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that movie had some other flaws, but you're right, quite right. That's a terrific sequence.
Yeah, and John, I hate to break this to you, but there's no perfect movie. Well, maybe there is, but and before we're going to take a short break in just a second. But I want to, since we're still on movies, and there's 3 movies that you had your books turned into, and we covered the Mean Season and Heart's War, but there was one right in between there. There again about I want to say mid to late 80s, Just Cause with Sean Connery and Lawrence Fishburne, which another fabulous movie.
Everybody always mentions Connery and Fishburne, but it's Ed Harris.
Oh God, I love him.
Who plays the Blair Sullivan, the serial killer in prison. His performance, slightly over the top, but unbelievably wonderful.
But you know what? I don't mind over the top from Ed Harris because that was such a wicked, cool bad guy.
Yes.
And this was not. Well, I'm thinking of other really good bad guys, but you're right. I apologize for not bringing him up in between Sean and Lawrence, but I'm like, Ed, he just ate up the scenery in a good way.
The most famous scene where he talks about how powerful he is was virtually taken word for word from the book.
Nice.
And it was one of the sequences that I was always most proud of. It underscores true evil and a bit of crazy, but also a bit of non-crazy too. In the world of thrillers, and this is true for film and writing, there is a kind of obligation to accuracy.
Yeah.
And not accuracy in the way that a journalist sees it, but accuracy in the way that almost that a psychologist sees it. I keep saying that, but that's you have to hit the right emotional chords, because that's what makes a shootout work.
A sense of validity, so that it's real, so it's believable. So the stakes and the premise and the meaning and the heart behind it all. It can't just the random shoot 'em up, bang bang. I don't want to offend anyone who loves John Wick, and I love me some John Wick. But by the time you got to number 4, you're just like, Jesus, really?
No one in all that time managed a headshot. What I mean? Yeah, I mean,
there's 37 guys coming at him with automatic rifles.
With other friends of mine who are writers, who will laugh about automatic weapons.
Yeah,
and if you talk to a military guy, they'll talk, with automatic weapons. You can't really roll out of the way and then fire your 9mm pistol and shoot some guy, because basically you're in pieces, right? Because that Uzi or that AR-15 has just done everything, So I mean,
John, I say this to my wife every single time, and right in the middle of one of those scenes that you just described, I'm sitting there going, "Wait, what?" And she looks over at me like, "It's movies, let it go." But I'm like, "Look," and he rolls and he spins and he stands up with a single shot and he gets the guy. And I'm anyway. And it's why we go to movies. All right, look, we're gonna have to take a short break so that our sponsor gets to say a little something for us. But when we come back with John, we're going to be talking about, of course, Jack's Boys. So don't move. We'll be right back. And we are back with Jon Katzenbach, and we're talking about Jack's Boys. Thank you for staying with us, and welcome back, John.
Thank you.
I hope this is the compliment that I think it is, because as I was reading this, and I don't generally like to compare people, because that makes me feel like I'm saying to you, "Oh, you remind me of blank," as though that person was first, and you're not your unique self. But as I was, so I'm going, all that tee up really ruined it, didn't it? But Stephen King comes to mind. I hope that's a compliment.
I actually admire King a lot. I'm less fond of his horror books, but when he writes Crime and Punishment, he's very, very together on this. Think of Misery.
Yeah.
And I
God, I
mean,
love
the
that.
wonderful conceit in Misery is there's this guy being sort of, cut up and tortured by, Annie Wilkes.
Yeah.
And he's writing and he realizes it's pretty good, and he thinks, I'm going to keep at it, right? This is good, right? Which is very much like any writer, go ahead, cut off my arm, but hey, this is good, right? So, I think that it's funny for me. I get compared. You get compared to a lot of people in your career, and if we were doing this in Spanish and this was in Latin America, they would be talking about Gabriel Garcia Marquez and me, or Carlos Fuentes. If we were doing this in Germany, it would probably be Sebastian Fitzek, who's a wonderful writer. So I mean, I I like to think that in the world of thrillers that I try to stand alone. And in Jack's Boys, the fact of the matter is when you get right down to it, what is a thriller, a modern American thriller? You try to find a nightmare that has a certain commonality.
Right.
And you weave your characters into that. And in Jack's Boys, very simply, it's you think of having teenagers, and what are they doing when you're not watching?
Yeah.
And that was the sort of impetus for that book. And, this will really sound sick and twisted, which is my normal state. But when I came up with the idea of the group of serial killers and then these teenagers that insult them.
Yeah.
I really literally got up, walked around the room, and was sort of going, yes, 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 that works, because that's what teenagers do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what serial killers do.
Absolutely. I did mean that as a compliment, so please don't take it in any other way. And so second of all, it is thoroughly original, so kudos to that. And the last point is, and I was doing some research, it seems as though, I mean, you're very popular here, but you mentioned Spanish and German, for instance, and you're killing it in those markets overseas.
David, I wish, when I was growing up, it never occurred to me that I might want to be a cult hero, in Latin America, or in parts of Europe. And there are a number of other writers who have had similar experiences. And I think it comes as a surprise to all of us. I think it reflects that different cultures, certainly Germany as opposed to Argentina, as opposed to Chile, as opposed to Mexico, as opposed to England, they all have different ways of looking at books and stories, and that come out of their own cultures. But if you happen to sort of fit into what they imagine a book should be, you explode in these areas, and I'm very grateful, frankly. I mean, it's immense fun. Let me say to go to either Latin America or Europe, and contrast the way people read a thriller with the way they do here in the United States.
And that was my next question is like, can you describe for me the difference between, say, rolling into a Barnes and Nobles or a Poison Pen, for instance, in the States, and doing the same thing in South America, for instance? What is, how do the reactions of the audience differ?
Let me, the simplest way to put it is that in Latin America, for example, it's all about character. I think in the United States, people are drawn to plot. Does that, and the way, here we seem to like the interaction. This gets highly technical.
I love it. Keep going.
The interaction between characters and the overarching plot that they're fit into. I mean, you mentioned Don Winslow. He's a great example of how those characters sort of blend into a plot that is rich with detail.
100%.
And I think that is, I find that in Latin America. If I go to Europe, it's the attitudes are a little different. They're always seem to be interested in the richness of character. They truly want to know, why everybody does something. Let me give you a good example of that.
Please do.
And it's a wonderful, wonderful book, Smilla's Sense of Snow.
Okay.
And if you go back to, how Peter Hoag invented that story, it's all about who that person is. And I'm rambling on here. Like that, but it's so like I say, it's very different. And one of the more interesting things is that you get different questions in every country.
Yeah. I bet.
Mexico, the questions in Mexico are not going to be the same as Argentina, and they sure as heck aren't going to be the same as Germany.
Oh my God, I would love to be a fly on the wall to hear the difference. Because, we get in this little groove in our head. Oh, and it's just kind of systematically the same. But to step into a different culture and go, let's look at this story and this whole scene through their eyes. Yeah.
It's very, and I think that also one of the things that's extremely interesting for me as an author is to see, what age groups are attracted to a story.
Right.
In Latin America, for example, Jack's Boys, which is already out down there, #1 bestseller, and it was. I mean, I can't tell you the number of college age men and women who embrace that story.
Wow.
And then, but on some of my prior books, you go to a thing in Germany and everybody there is, 40 to 60 years old. I mean, and, there's not a young person in the audience. So, I mean, and don't ask me to explain why this phenomena exists. I have no idea.
Jon, why does this phenomena exist?
Well, let me answer that, David.
But it makes sense since this deals with technology, dark web, etc. It makes sense that a younger crowd may be predisposed toward that. Plus, I mean, for instance, I'm fascinated by the dark web, so for whatever reason. And so maybe therein lies some of the equations. Some of it also may be the sensibilities, or rather the mindset of these characters in and of themselves. I mean,
Well, one of the great challenges for me in writing Jack's Boys was that I had to endow, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Easy with different, not just different crime patterns, but different personalities completely, so that they would mesh together. And, when I sort of came up with them, I thought, this is great. And then I realized I had really set myself a profoundly, difficult writing challenge, one that I truly, embraced. It was, great fun for me ultimately to do.
Well, it was neat too. Like when you're mentioning Charlie, all you got to do is mention Charlie, and I know instantly kind of his mindset and his vernacular and his crime passion. And then you mention Easy, and you instantly kick into, like any like any particular character. So I always love that. And one of the things I was most fascinated with, and for some reason I really loved it, is not only the ongoing social commentary, but it's the constant film and popular song references. I just love that for some reason. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad. Thank you. Thank you. I really make an effort to put those in. And apropos of that, I was once giving a speech. I think this was in Bogota, about 600 people in the audience, right? And I at the end, Q&A at the end, I said, wait a second. I said, I want a show of hands here. When I put in a musical reference, who listens to that? And 2/3 of the hands went up. And because, what it does is, or a literary reference, it evokes something for you, a 100%, memory.
100%.
And so I really like doing that. I'm about to redo my website, and I'm going to put in I'm going to go back over my books and find and make a playlist of all of the musical references that I put in.
Please do. I think that would be so awesome. And if you want to take it one step further in that playlist, just hook it up to Spotify so that anybody who goes to your website can sit there and listen to the entire soundtrack. And I'll tell you, I want to jump on something that you just said. And this is exactly why I love the references. You'd mention a song. It wouldn't take me out of the story. That's the beautiful thing. I wasn't distracted by that. I just simply, with my other half of my brain, reached in and remembered the emotion that I was feeling during that time in history. And it was just a great little way to add a spice to the scene.
David, thank you so much, because that's so reassuring to hear. Yeah. Because that's precisely why those things go in there. You can't stop somebody from reading, because that defeats the whole point of writing in the first place. But you want to evoke something inside them, when you accomplish that, and I don't ever pretend to think that every time that it'll all work, because there's got to be some times when you go, who's that, right? But it's. Go ahead.
I was going to say, going back to an earlier comment that we made about trusting your audience, if I'm a reader and I'm not picking up that song, or I don't remember that film reference, that's okay. I'll just let it slide by, because I'm still so engrossed in the story, it won't distract me. However, conversely, as I just said, if all of a sudden it brings up a song, I'm like, oh man, that was high school. I remember my buds and I would sit around and listen to that song, and it gave you that emotion, but you kept going. And the same with the films. Look how you and I have been talking for about 55 minutes, and we've mentioned 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 6 or 7 films. And I bet you dollars to donuts that in that conversation, you pulled something, could have been French Connection or Bullet or whatever. And you remembered the time, you remembered the feel of that era. There's going to be some kind of a visceral clue, a cue that hits you, that you go, oh man. But you're still in the story and you're still moving along. But it's references. It's just
David. I think you're 1,000% right on this. Because what happens is I think that it triggers something inside, and if it's not a reference that you're familiar with, in other words, okay, I've never heard Saint Stephen by the Grateful Dead, so you just zoom right by it.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll go back and check it. But if you hear All Along the Watchtower by Jimi Hendrix, you can, and you remember that was playing, in the bar the night I had to slug that guy.
Yes.
And it has an impact.
I mean, come on, think about it, John. The things that trigger memories. It's one of the best compliments I can pay you, is the fact that I can enjoy your story. I can be distracted from the everyday that we're all entangled in, but I can be reminded of these songs I haven't thought about for a while, or a movie reference I haven't thought about. And it really does make the whole experience fuller.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, damn it, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was going to say it's like icing on the cake. I want to ask you this one thing as we start to wrap up, because I know you got plenty of stuff you need to be doing. When you're writing, and specifically in the case of Jack's Boys, is there a message or a meaning or a feeling you hope your readers take away? Or do you find, you know what, I'm just aiming for pure entertainment. So, if you take something away, great. If not, you're just being entertained for 600 pages, that's good too.
I mean, it's a difficult question.
Good.
The second part.
Okay.
If readers don't take anything away and just enjoy the story and whatnot, that's fine. I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact of the matter is, yes, I want to make some social commentary. I want to engage people in a world that has some meaning.
Mm.
And if they dive into that and that becomes, it speaks to them, I'm even happier.
Yeah.
So I'm okay with either. I prefer the first, but the second is definitely okay. Very, very emotionally, psychologically difficult question. You should ask that of every damn author that shows up on your show.
Consider it done, sir.
Yeah.
All right. Well, as we start to wrap, I have a standard close that I like to finish with because so many of my listeners come to me for this. They love hearing authors like you of your stature. And they love to hear, if I could hear one piece of writing advice from Jon, this is what they tune in for. If you've lasted this long in the show, I know that you're hanging out to find out this. I mean, and with your, what are we at, 15? This is 15 books now, right?
It's some embarrassingly large number, but it's not like my friend Larry Block, who's got 5 zillion, but right. So I mean,
Larry's been at it a long time. We could spend a half hour on Larry. I love Lawrence Block.
Totally admirable. Only piece of advice that I like to, I give many pieces of advice to writers, not the least of which is, are you capable of sitting by yourself alone in a room for a year? With the characters that you've invented. But I think the most important thing that I always say to people is have confidence in your own story. Don't think that the way anyone else would do it is right. You're going to be happier with telling whatever story you want your way, and embrace that and stick with it. Whether you sell 0 copies or a zillion, you're going to be happier telling the story your own way. Of course, the other thing I always say is you should always read the first chapter of Don Winslow's Savages because it's perfect.
Oh man, I wish it was within arm reach. I have every one of his books, in case you didn't know that. Yeah. And I am with you, boy. That's one of my all-time favorites. And that first chapter, nothing like it. Right,
nothing like it. Nothing. I remember the first time I read it, and people will go look at it now and think this is ridiculous. And then I looked at it and said, "No, it's not."
Yeah.
David, there are so many writers that I admire. Here's the one dirty little secret that I'll add to this conversation. I very rarely now read anything in my own genre.
Oh, why is that?
I read my friends.
Uh-huh.
And the guys I really admire.
Mm-hmm.
But we live in such a litigious world. I just don't want something. I mean, I think there's a lot of really brilliant writing out there. Mm-hmm. And I don't want somebody else's brilliance to creep into my dark soul, and land on a page of a book.
Fortunately, I get to read a whole lot of books for this show. And I get what you're saying, and I understand that, and I appreciate it. And then I think I'm going to go back to our mutual pal, Don. And then, and I heard Don said this to me once about an author that he really likes. And that author is, I rearranged my office, so I don't know where I put that book. I can see the title, Rousseau?
Richard Rousseau.
Richard Rousseau. Thank you. He goes, when I read Rousseau, I go, what am I doing? I need to just quit right now. And I want to say every time I read Don Winslow, I go, I can't top this.
David, my experience like that was when I read Jim Harrison's Legends of the Fall.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, I can't do that. I mean, and Harrison, bless his heart, who passed away, he was a wonderfully lovely guy.
Yeah.
But I thought, to write that whole book with a whole novella without, hardly any dialogue or, it was so brilliantly done, So I almost gave up. That was when I almost said, wrap it up, get a job writing editorials at a newspaper.
But Jon, let me circle back to a piece of writing advice you just gave me and my listeners is write your own story and be happy with that and be good with that. And I think about, I'm reading a book by Rick Rubin, and his book about creativity. Rick Rubin, the music producer. I hope to get him on my podcast one day because he's just fascinating. But he said, you want to take the pressure off of yourself? You get all wrapped up in querying and all this stuff. How about just saying, hey, I'm going to write this book for me. I'm going to write it so that I'm happy and I'm pleased. I'm going to treat it almost like a journal entry, which is just for me. And if at the end I'm finished with it and I feel good about it and I pass it off to somebody and they like it, great. But if not, I'm not going to put that pressure on myself. And boy, has that just released something in my brain.
David, that's what really, I obviously subscribe to that.
Mm-hmm.
I just would sort of suggest that that's just a different kind of pressure.
Yeah.
Well,
folks, if you want to learn more, visit jonkatzenbach.com. And of course, the book is Jack's Boys, and it'll come out tomorrow. Jon, this has been, I cannot express to you how thoroughly enjoyable and how honored I am that you took time to spend it with me.
The honor is mine, David, and thoroughly, I thoroughly enjoyed this. And frankly, you only pierced my heart with a couple of questions. So I mean, you made me squirm slightly. I'm good at not indicating that I'm squirming.
I know your secret's safe with me. Listen, just the fact that you're a legend in so many ways, and just the fact that you took time to talk to me, I'm very grateful. And your book is fun. It's good. It's unnerving. It's all the things that you want in a thriller and a mystery and a suspense. So I hope you'll come back again sometime soon.
Sit down and write another book.
Yeah, it's easy peasy. It only takes a year, right?
Exactly. What else have I got to do with my time, right?
Yeah. Oh, so good. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you.
Now stand by for show 2 and our Memorial Day thriller double shot on the Thriller Zone. Hey, Matthew, I can call you Matt Quirk. Welcome to the Thriller Zone.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Now, I like the fact that you are such a meticulous attention to detail guy. You got the TV poster behind you. You got the book placed. This is not your first rodeo, is it?
It's a Potemkin village back there because I'm in a corner of the bedroom. I've mucked up, and then I see these authors and they have these ego walls that you could die for. And I just, fortunately, I stole a poster from the premiere, and I still have an arc left. I gave the rest away, and the shoebox it's perched upon hasn't fallen over. So thank you, and yeah. I'm glad. But this is nothing. This is plaster and lighting.
Yeah. Well, I want you to know that the little view that you have is very beautifully, handsomely articulated. However, if I spun the camera a little bit over, it is a disaster zone with piles of books on the floor and maybe some underwear too, but we'll keep that to ourselves.
And I like to joke about the Zoom dickie, that this is just, it's better with a collar shirt, that this just cuts off here and then I'm in some Bermuda shorts or something.
I'm not even believing the Bermuda shorts, to tell you the truth, man.
No.
Yeah. And by the way, Dickie, there's a pull from the past. Did you ever own a Dickie?
People are wearing Dickies anymore. And I think it's a funny bit in the Zoom era, but I also, it doesn't sound, you don't want to say, I had my Dickie on the Zoom because, that's the end of your career.
For those of you who do not know what a dickie is, and I had them back in high school, it's a turtleneck that's sewn to a little flap, and the flap will go here, and the other flap is on the back, so you can put it underneath the shirt, so you can look like you're wearing a turtleneck and a shirt, but you're not super hot.
And they do sell a Zoom dickie. I looked this up, and it's just a collared shirt that you can wear under a sweater, or if you get your camera right, you can only wear that part. And that's my sort of icebreaker Zoom joke, the Zoom dickie.
The Zoom dickie. Yeah. Now, if I go down the hall a few minutes after the show and I say, "Hey, honey, can you want to see my new Zoom dickie?" She's going to go,
No. Yeah,
honey, I'm on my own Zoom call. Yeah, I'm on my own Zoom.
Make sure that it's very clear what you're talking about.
Yeah. All right. Well, it is a pleasure to meet you. I did learn very recently that you and I are inside. We're not the same zip code, but we're in the same city per se. I'm in Encinitas, and you're in
San Diego, Ocean Beach, Point Loma.
Yeah.
Neighborhood.
Well, in the 5th season, coming up in July, the Thriller Zone is going to be going on location and doing more face-to-face. So we somehow missed that this time with communication faux pas, but we will do that in the next book. How about that?
That sounds fantastic.
Because you're in a gorgeous part of town.
As are you.
It is pretty sweet.
But that's San Diego.
Yeah.
You could fall off a truck and you're like, oh, it's beautiful here.
Yeah, it is true. We're exactly 1 mile from the beach. I'm actually reading a project that I'm working on yesterday, overlooking Swami's, which is a famous little surfing spot.
Yeah.
And as you can see, because of the little sun, it's perfect every day. It's pretty silly. All right. The book is Inside Threat. We're going to be talking about this in great detail. It is a riveting read. And boy, I was thinking back when we were getting ready to go on the show, and I'm like, what was the first book? This is only the second book of yours that I read. The first one was Hour of the Assassin. Mm-hmm. And I ran across that, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago, and it was Nick Avero's Special Agent, Secret Service. Wow, that was one of my favorite books because that thing flew, by the way. What was your secret there?
Well, the secret was that was a rewrite, and it's always funny because when I look back on it, it seems like one of these like meticulously planned, clean, lean books,
right.
But I had to rewrite the whole thing in 90 days with kind of a new plot, and then I came up for air at the end because it was 90 days straight, and I never worked so hard on anything in my life. And I came up and I'm like, I've been in so deep. I just hope this is any good. And then said, oh, this is great. And then, when I look back at it now, it just seems like this nice, like, concept that sort of is like, I'll say it again, like clean and lean, and
right.
And when you look at the actual gestation of that book, it was this crazy process of tearing out the whole plot and putting in a new one. So you never really know what goes into something and kind of what comes out at the end or what will make a good book. Because when I was in the middle of that rewrite, I was like, oh, this is a disaster. Everything's falling apart. And then I came up and I said, this is great. And I was like, okay, great.
Yeah. Isn't it funny, Matt, what we say as writers in those quiet moments to ourselves as we're crafting in the wee small hours of the morning? Thank you, Frank Sinatra. And you're just doing that work, and you could be a third, a half, you could be 3/4 of the way through and just have that little voice on your shoulder go, this really kind of sucks.
Oh, yeah.
And how you have to go, hey, wait a minute, I wasn't talking to you. Get away. I mean, it's a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, it's a funny job where you just factor in 1 or 2 all as lost moments in each book. Not in, because that's like a screenwriting term, not in the action of the book, but in your life as you write the book. There's going to be a moment where you're like, this book doesn't work.
Right.
I wasted 9 months. I could have missed my 10 months, And it's funny to see people like Harlan Coben, who's like so incredible, so successful. And, you read his interviews and he's like, oh, yeah, I go through hell on each book. Or Daniel Silva, who's a master. And I was reading one of his books and he's like, I had to completely rewrite this book and I didn't know I'd get it in time. So it's a ride.
I first heard, I heard it recently. Who was I on with? Bob Dugoni. And Bob has written a stack of paper. And he made a comment that, oh yeah, Dave, it's nerve wracking. I almost hate everyone. I'm like, Bob, are you kidding me? And he goes, yeah, every single solitary one. And I thought, what is that about us? Have we not given ourselves permission? Do we not think we're good enough? I mean, it's a crazy mindset.
Well, it's really subjective, you know?
Yeah.
So there's times where I'll outline a book and then give it to the editor and they're like, well, it didn't work, you know? And I'll say, well, that was the outline. So it's such an execution dependent subjective thing, and it's such a crazy job where I was very successful with the first book, very fortunate, and then I went to write the second book, and I assumed that they would say, like, give us an outline and we'll kind of check in and make sure everything's moving along. Like, you know, I would have a job almost because they had a lot invested in the second book. And they were just like, we'll see you next year with a book. I hope it's good. They weren't that, like, brusque about it, but that was effectively what was going on. And I thought, I'm just going to go off and hope that in sitting and playing make-believe by myself in a room for a year, I come up with something stellar. So it's a crazy journey in each book.
While we're on this topic, and you're going to have great insight to this, I can already tell. So I'm thinking to myself, what if you handed it to your editor and the editor goes, I don't feel it. And, okay, let me get back to you. That night you're having dinner with a friend who happens to be another editor, and you're just, I don't think this would ever happen. And you go, here, take a look. Oh yeah, I got some time. And they loved it. What would that do to your head?
Oh, well, that can happen because I have like beta readers and I have an incredible agent who was an editor. And so when everybody says it stinks in the same way, that's great. You're like, oh, okay, I'll fix that. But when you have the really brain-breaking thing is when two people tell you different things and they're people whom you trust, which I've had happen. But that's why I'm the president, secretary, treasurer, and board of Rough Draft Inc. here. Like, at the end of the day, I have to, that's actually true because I have a loan now. But at the end of the day, like, you have to decide what's good.
Do you actually own Rough Draft?
Yeah. And when I do like paperwork stuff, I have to be like a check to myself, signed by the president myself, seconded by the treasurer myself. It's hilarious. Yeah.
Hey, and do you ever walk to your office and knock on the door and then sit down and say, come in, and then turn back and go, hey, listen, you shorted me on this check?
Yeah, and I fire myself periodically.
As you should.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before we cover Inside Threat, which we're going to deal into, I want to know about, and I want to do this because I think it's so cool. You have a smash television series on your hands right now. So for those who maybe have been living in a cave and you don't know what The Night Agent is, I want to play, if I may, a trailer from that.
Hello? This runs deeper than you realize. And farther than you can imagine.
This particular show has everything. And I love the setup. Like when the guy's on the phone, here he is just toiling away. I'm down here in the basement. Oh, brother. And all of a sudden the phone rings. Well, that doesn't happen. And let the games begin. By the way, so big kudos to landing this gig. What a huge thing. I want to know, how in the wide world of thrillers did you land this gig? Were you just walking along one day and said, oh, look, here's the book, and somebody just comes up and go, hey, this will make a really great series? I mean, tell me that process, because I'm so curious.
Yeah. I mean, I will back up a little bit to address something you said, which is like that phone call. That was the whole book, just the hook, you know? Because I had a friend who had a night watch job, and I imagined him sitting by a phone all night that never rings, and one day he rings, and it's like, oh, crazy. And then I talked about it with writer friends, and then I used it to get a new agent, and then they all said, go. And I said, great. And then I sat down and I said, well, then what happens? So, I just had the hook. And then I had to find out, like, well, is the government really going to pay someone to sit by a phone? And then, and then you're just off to the races of writing a book. Sure. The experience, it was a little bit like you discussed of, I write the book and then it goes to a film agent. And what I've found is you want a film agent, the really good ones, they only talk when something really substantive is happening. So, if somebody's like, hey, I got Francis Ford Coppola's cousin to read it, you're like, oh, and then you have Hollywood Dreams, and, if they're like, or you want to adapt, what is it? They'll say like, Winnie the Pooh is is in public domain. You want to write a Winnie the Pooh crime thriller? You're like, great, but and then you're running around with Hollywood Dreams, and it's terrible. So it's good to have an agent who just calls you when something of substance happens, because the kind of name of the game is to not get distracted by shiny objects and to just sit down and write the books every day and stay hungry. What you are able to do as a writer is try to get the best kind of representation you can, and I was really fortunate to have Dan Conaway as my agent, and then Dan Conaway, through him and Writer's House, we landed with a fellow named Will Watkins, who was at ICM, which was really cool to be a part of there. And they were acquired by CAA, so now he's at CAA. And he just really liked the books, and I had never met him. And he got 200 no's on the night agent. So it was just a thing where he loved the books, and I had never had dinner with him, I had never met him, I had never charmed him. So the other aspect of this, like from kind of like a craft advice perspective thing, is to just write the good book. And what's really nice, and I talk about this in my author talks with people who want to get into publishing stuff, is it's actually, if you can believe it, got a huge meritocratic element to it, because I was just like a laid-off junior employee, junior reporter from The Atlantic when I got my first book, and that got this crazy ride. So it's really cool, and what I like about the way everything in the industry works through agents is you just go right. You don't have to be meeting everybody and taking people out to dinner and sending whiskey to everybody at the end of the year. You just write, and agents know everybody, and they do that, and you can just kind of focus on your story. So that's basically what happened. This guy, Will, my champion in Hollywood, basically, he just kept taking it out, and then he connected with Jamie Vanderbilt, who wrote some great White House movies, some great other movies, and he loved it. And then so a production company took it on, Project X. They were kind of brand new, but really well-established, really talented people. And I'd had stuff optioned before, so I was like, okay, I'm not going to get my hopes up,
Right.
And then they said Sean Ryan from The Shield wanted, and other great shows, wanted to take it on and maybe turn it into a show. And then I was like, okay, this seems to be like a big deal. But you never get across the finish line. And I've learned kind of the hard way, but it's a good lesson to never get your hopes up, never get too distracted. And then they said, well, Netflix picked it up from him. And I said, okay. And I was like really excited, but also just keeping everything in perspective. And then when they finally tell you something's going to get made, you're like, but because, you're like, it's like Lucy with the football. Nothing gets made. So, and there's always another hurdle. But so I didn't really believe it until I started seeing snippets of video coming out from the set, and then went to the set and saw, Gabe kicking someone's ass. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be a real thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you
really
have
cool.
Gabe actually kicking said ass on a set, you got a pretty good idea the thing is rolling.
Yeah, yeah. And he's very good at that.
Yeah, he is quite good. Good looking guy. Dynamic. Here's the second part of that question is how much involvement do you get on any kind of a daily basis? Now, I know there are some writers who go, they write it, they hand it off, and that's it. Nobody wants to see you again, or they're like, yeah, hey, just put the writer over there. Other people, like I got to see Jack Carr with that Amazon project, really kind of get in and put his hand on the terminal list. He even got a scene in the series, and, you know, so how much involvement do you have? That's got to be cool.
Well, it's up to what you want to do as a writer. So,
Sure.
and I mean, within reason, right? Because you can say,
Yeah.
I want to write the screenplay, and they'll say, no. So this was kind of ideal because I also recently had my first child. So I don't want to be like living in Vancouver for 4 months and, going to a writer's room for 12 hours a day for 3 months. And
Yeah.
although it's so cool and I love TV movies and I hope I get to do all that stuff someday, but it's just like not the time in my life. Now it's a time for balance. So it worked out perfectly because once Sean Ryan came on, it was such a thrill and a relief because I love Sean Ryan stuff. I watch his stuff and I marvel at how he can just take these characters and set them in opposition based on kind of their like character design and just keep the tension going in a show for 6 or 7 years. And I kind of like study his stuff. And I think that must be so hard to do. And once I said, oh, well, great. I just want to make sure I don't get in the way of whatever you're doing here.
Right.
And then he was so nice. He sent me the script with this very gracious email. And it was uncanny to me because he's such a great showrunner. The idea that he would be like concerned about what I think in any way. I'm like, I'm just excited you're here. And then I read it and I loved it. And then I talked to him and we talked a little bit about the characters, and later I read press interviews he gave after the show came out, and those conversations turned out to be helpful and turned up in the show, which was really cool. But beside those top-level conversations, I didn't really have a lot to do day to day, but that was so nice because I just trusted him so much, because he's so good, that I could say, I'm here to help with anything, because, I spent a lot of time with these characters, and I'm also happy to help by just staying out of the way and trusting you all to do what you do on this, which I was really excited to see. And then, my God, he delivered because, the show, honestly, it's winning the lottery to get a show made. And then it's like winning the lottery again to have it not flop, basically. I was just hoping it would do okay, And then it turned into this like monster thing. It's a top 5 all time on Netflix. And so I said, okay, well, yeah, it had more viewers than Bridgerton. It's crazy.
Wow.
It's crazy.
Wow.
So I was like, okay, whatever Sean Ryan does that gets the entire world to just love it is amazing. And it was so cool for me because there are scenes from the book, like, the opening of the book and the opening of the show, that are almost straight from the book. And it's such a thrill, because I grew up an 80s baby with TV and movies, to think like, stuff I write, you could just put it on screen. And also it's a thrill to see it all rendered and have these professionals doing it. And at the same time, by the time when I was reading and then when I was watching, I got to the end of the pilot, it was the first brand new thing from Sean. Because half of the show, maybe a little less, but big elements of the show are original to Sean, because he had something he was working on, and he kind of combined them. So it was a really fun experience for me, because I came to those twists the same way a reader would, or a new viewer, and I got the satisfaction of seeing it rendered on screen, and then at the end I said, "What? Who are these people? what's with this baby? What the hell is going on here? So I got to come at it fresh as the audience would. It was just a really cool experience.
I think the single coolest thing that could possibly happen, like you just said, Matt, is to be sitting there a year, 2 years, maybe how many years ago, and you're writing this scene. You come up with the scene out of nowhere. You're hanging out in Point Loma, and you have this idea. Hey, what about if phone rings, and you write it down, you get going. And perhaps years later, you get to flip on the television, and there it is. That, to me, is just about as good as it gets.
It's so cool. I mean, and
yeah,
it's so cool. And the other thing, I mean, there's a few aspects, and it was especially cool because most authors, maybe because I have an exceptional experience here, they're adapting your show. Are they treating you like garbage? Are you happy? You know, I think there's an expectation among other authors that it's not going to go well, or you're not going to be treated well. And I'm sure there's some substance to that somewhere in the world, but I was really fortunate with this. And everybody was really nice to me at the premiere. And, you know, my joke is like, oh, it's that old Hollywood story where everyone over-delivers, things happen really quickly, and everyone's really nice, you know?
Right, yeah.
So it was great because there's some trepidation, I guess, that goes into being adapted. And I just had a wonderful experience. And there's also an aspect, it's good to go see them do it because regardless of how the show comes out at the end, it is such a huge, painstaking undertaking. And I was totally in awe of how hard they work. Because there's a little madness going on when you're finishing a book where you're just working 12 hours and you're completely in this imaginary world. And then to see 500 people all doing that in the middle of the night in the tunnels under a former insane asylum in Vancouver, which is where they shot the tunnels. It's amazing. And it's shocking how hard they work and how meticulous everything has to be in a TV show. You know, one conversation that takes 5 minutes of screen time takes 2 hours to shoot. A fight scene, the comms tower fight scene, took 14 hours. And then when they were done, they went and shot in the tunnels under the insane asylum. And I was completely in awe of how hard they all work.
Yeah. The number of hours in a day, it is pretty insane. Well, let's get into Inside Threat because this book right here is something else. It drops on 6/13, so there's going to be two things I'm celebrating that day. Your book and the birthday of my late mother. But it is a terrific read, and I know that this is going to be, talking about all this television series and so forth, this is going to be either a television series or a movie. I've just got a very good feeling about that. I'm putting that power into the universe. We'll
see.
We'll see.
Maybe some news will come out shortly.
Maybe some news shortly, soon. Yeah.
But nothing I can discuss yet.
No, I'm just, I'm giving that all up to the big guys in where they need to be. So I want to give you, if I may, and then we're gonna kind of break it down into a little elevator pitch. Here's what this way I can do my takeaway on the book without giving anything away. So folks, here you go. This is what the book has. Questionable good guys, enough romance to keep you bothered, enough surprises to keep you engaged, a classic bad couple who provide enough drama, while a classic thriller that provides plenty of action and even manages a surprising and unexpected twist. Ponder that, my Matthew friend.
That sounds pretty good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, so a lot of times I like to dig deep because I'm always making notes and I'm keeping, I highlight, I mark the hell out of the books and I go, there are certain things I really like. Now, here's a couple things. And then I want your elevator pitch. And I know you have it. There's a few things I really like about it. Love Eric Hill, who's your main guy. I dig Amber Cody too. I like her attitude. I like her grit. I like the way she is the best kind of female action Secret Service agent. She's got great backstory and depth, and she's not taking any crap. And Their chemistry is dynamite. And I got to tell you something. Your president, James Klein, and First Lady, Sarah, without sounding like I'm saying anything bad about our current president, I'm like, these are the kind of cats that I want in office.
Oh, good. Yeah. Because, well, presidents are tough. And it's hard to do presidents as real characters. So it's nice to, give them some depth and, to have the First Lady have some depth and moxie too. So it was, well, thank you, because this book, it started with kind of the movie premise of the setup of the book, which is, what if the president, this might be the elevator pitch, I might be getting...
Yeah, give me the elevator pitch. Here it is. Insert here.
What if the president gets locked into this huge emergency doomsday bunker, which is a real place, to get away from a threat, and finds himself locked inside with the threat. And then, they see the first body turn up, and then you're off to the races. So that it was a premise-driven book, and it was fun to see the characters kind of populate themselves and become more complex and stuff. And I have a great editor, Emily Crump, who really helped with the character development, and I'm really grateful for her edits on that, because it was nice to have somebody to go back and forth with and to round people out.
Yeah. And there's one thing I really love, and I want to mention this because here in the back of the book, I've got a highlighted. You're talking about, well, first of all, let's start with the front. So I love it when guys do this. Guys like you. First of all, I have a nice little cheat sheet so I know who everybody is, because it's chock full of agents. And at first, I started the book, Matt, by going, okay, yeah, I've got a lot of characters, and I kind of blew over that, and then I get going. I'm like, okay, hold on, let me go back a second. Let me remind myself who's who in the lineup. But then I dig this because I like details. So Raven Rock Mountain Complex is an actual complex, so you get to see, where the blast doors are, and the cavern, and the war room. And I love the description of the war room. So the President Klein's basically got a miniature Washington White House right there underground, and the different buildings in the reservoir. But then one step further, you tell me how the main tunnel is and the buildings and how everything works. But then back here, I love this. In Matt's acknowledgments, in real life, the blast doors swing rather than retract, which is interesting because you're like, well, what does that matter? But you do. And the springs under the buildings aren't actually tall enough to walk through. So I made them a little higher and could have a few good fight scenes in there. I love that kind of detail.
I guess it's a humble brag, because, Daniel Silva, everything in his book is real. And if it's not real, he'll tell you, he'll be like, the lamppost is on the left-hand side of the street in the acknowledgments. And I think that's fun for me as a reader, because when I read one of these, I'm in it for the story, but sure, if I know that I'm getting the real stuff and there's good research, and Raven Rock is a real place, these kind of secret emergency presidential powers where they can take over the country, those are real. So I love being able to read a good story where I feel like, I've been eating popcorn, but then at the end, I feel like I also got my vegetables a little bit. We might need to revise that metaphor a little bit, but you see where I'm going.
I got my popcorn and my broccoli all at the same time, so I'm feeling good.
That actually sounds terrible.
Yeah, when most people are putting M&Ms in their popcorn, you're putting broccoli.
Sprinkles and Brussels sprouts.
Well, it's good when guys like David Baldacci and Jack Carr are singing your praises. I mean, these guys who are busy writing their own books, and they only have so much time in the day, so they're tearing through your books and they're saying glorious things. So I love that. But I can't recall, Matt, who was it? And perhaps you can help me with this. Who said this? It's the best crime thriller of the season. Do you know who said that? I want to give credit where credit is due, baby. I can't
remember. I got a quote from Michael Connolly, I think, on The Night Agent, where I needed a fainting couch, because he said it was one of the best books to come along in years, and he's incredible. So I really was blown away by that.
I'm going to go one better for you, Matt. Our friend Michael says the story is impossible to put out of mind, revealing, relevant, and one of the best thrillers to come along in years. I mean, when you have Michael Conley,
and the thing is, with him, I didn't like. It wasn't something where I had mowed his lawn growing up and I had like a chick to call in. I emailed him very graciously to say like, I love your books, and he wrote back. He said, "Send me one," and then that came through, and then I passed out because I was so blown away.
you bring up a superb point, and I wonder if you'll give me just a second to talk about it. I was at Thriller Fest 2019 in New York City, and I was sitting at the feet of probably somebody like Harlan Coben, because I remember I had such a fun hoot talking to him. And right when you think as a novice writer, oh my God, I wish I could get a blurb from such and such, someone on stage, perhaps Harlan, said, "Hey guys, if you got a favorite author, just ask them. Sometimes you never know if they'll say yes or not, but just ask them. All I can do is say no, right?"
Yeah, and I mean, what's funny about authors is it's so weird because when you go to a law firm like, I don't know, Wilmer Hale or something, you're not seeing Wilmer and Hale.
No.
You're seeing some guy down here, but like all these authors, with very rare exceptions, are one man, one woman bands. And also, because I didn't know authors growing up, so I always thought it was weird and they would be like on a pedestal or in a different thing. But except for the very tippy top people, most of us are just like excited to hear from you.
Yeah.
And even the tippy top people in thriller, mystery, suspense are total sweethearts. And there's this wonderful culture of paying it forward. So it's always incredible what a good community it is.
All right, two things. First of all, I do agree. I love that. And I have found the writing community to be incredibly loving and open-armed. Secondly, did you really use the phrase tippy-toppy?
Did I say tippy-toppy?
Yeah, you said tippy-toppy. Yeah, you said at the tippy-toppy of the...
Tippy-top. Tippy-top.
Tippy-top. Okay, tippy,
Yeah.
but still tippy-top, not tip-top, not very top, not the pinnacle. You went tip-top.
I spent a lot of time with my 15-month-old, so...
I was going to say...
Yeah. This is I'm code switching a little bit here, so it could be much worse.
Okay, because I was going to say, now she was born last February, if I recall, and you called her your new writing partner. So I'm like, okay, that's where tippy top came from, because you're tippy top. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Sorry to belabor that. Had to have some fun with it.
She was in the carrier because she's a good napper, but she would only nap on me. Right. So when I was polishing Inside Threat, I do baby stuff all morning, and then because I ended up having to work during paternity leave a little bit, and then I would put her in the like Baby Bjorn thing, and then she would sleep, and I would spend 2 hours at the stand-up desk polishing, and then I was just like completely exhausted because I had this gorgeous little lump, in the carrier while I was writing for 2 hours. So it was really sweet.
I'm a big fan of naps, afternoon naps.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if I could just get in that little Bjorn and come over and visit you and just grab a little nap. Sounds so cozy.
I think you might outweigh me. It would probably.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
Can you see
it? I did not see it coming. I didn't think this podcast was going that way, but it's fun. It'd be like that tandem parachute thing. That's what it looks like when they're in the front facing carrier.
Yeah. Yeah. I won't embarrass you. I'll stop there. All right. There are some people who say higher education isn't important. Others say it's mandatory. I'm probably one of those guys that has mixed feelings. I happen to have a slew of degrees, but I'm going to tell you something. Reading Inside Threat, you're going to see how Matthew's degree in history and literature from Harvard, no less, really has paid off. Because when you're reading this, this is not your average bear. And I'm not saying that in any kind of hooty-tooty-faluty kind of way. I'm just saying, as you read it, this guy is educated, and it shows. So that's a compliment in all the best ways.
Thank you.
It also begs a two-part question I'm famous for. Number one, Did you have any idea that you'd be able to craft a career as successful as you've been able to do, which could be a yes or no? And how far back does your writing passion go?
So, no, I was completely terrified.
Oh, wow.
And they're related. So I got into Harvard because I had done a bunch of like physics and chemistry research and was good at math. And I was a chemistry and physics major. And that was a proven thing that I was really good at. And when you go from like a public school in New Jersey to Harvard with one thing, you're like, I should stick with this thing. But I loved writing, and it was around, I think, the summer after my freshman year, all of my jobs fell through. And I was just doing like, I don't know, doing whatever for money, and like real whatever New Jersey stuff. And I was back at my parents' house, and I started writing, and I would write like in the middle of the night. And then my dad would come down for breakfast, and I'd be finishing writing. I would write on the deck in a little lawn chair with my laptop, because I still like writing at night. My schedule, I can't really do it. It's all possibility, and nobody's watching. Yeah. And that's when I first got the bug. But I would be like clocking out of the night shifts, and my dad would come down and be like, "What the hell is this kid doing? He's on the deck with a lawn chair writing." And that's when I caught the writing bug. And I also caught kind of the literature bug, but I had always loved English and literature. And the fun story is that my mom went back to school to finish her undergrad degree when I was in late elementary, early middle school, and then she went straight through to get her master's. So my house growing up, my dad would read like 5 thrillers a week, and then my mom would have like William Butler Yeats and Hilda Doolittle and Emily Dickinson, and she was getting her master's. So there was like a standard thing in my house with my mom would go in with a stack of books and lock the door, and you'd hear the IBM going because she was writing a literary study. And it was like the coolest thing on earth. And she'd come out, and there was Joseph Conrad and all these translations of the Iliad. So it was just a great stew of, every kind of good story. And I grew up on that stuff, and also Michael Crichton. I have a letter I wrote to Michael Crichton when I was 9 because I just like loved Jurassic Park, and so I had this nice stew, and I always had this literary stuff. And I remember in college when I wanted to switch to English, because one professor took a paper I had written in sort of a gen ed kind of course and said, "This is great," and he read it out to the class, and I was like, "Oh my god!" But I was terrified that I would never make a living. And I switched, and then I ended up getting a job in journalism, and through that sort of figured out that the old thriller things that I had read growing up, including like Joseph Conrad, like the nice literary bone stuff, were what I wanted to write. And then in working at the Atlantic in DC, I got sort of the material that fired my imagination, because in college they have you write very introspective literary stuff, and I stink at that. So my first goes at fiction were not great, because I was a 19-year-old kid. I thought I had come from because I went to public school, I thought I was had come from the mean streets, because Harvard was such a big distinction, but it wasn't really that big a jump.
Right.
And I had nothing really to say in like a literary introspection New Yorker short story way. So it didn't suit me. And I was just fortunate that I had the writing habit, and then I was at the Atlantic, so I got into the espionage, politics, foreign affairs stuff. And then it took me forever to figure out that actually thrillers were the book I would write. So that's kind of how it all came together. And then I got laid off from the Atlantic, and then heard back on the first thing I'd ever sent out professionally 3 days after I got my notice. And a very big deal agent said, "You should keep going." So I kept going. And it was just 2 years of living off of like meager savings, about to get married, telling my father-in-law like, "Oh, don't worry, this novel will work out." And And then the novel, The Wedding was kind of my deadline for this writing project. And, and then a month before the wedding, we sold the 500 to Little Brown and the film rights to Fox. So it's like a white knuckle ride. And I'm not one of these people who's like, well, a life in the arts, and I'm sure everything will work out. Like I'm a practical guy. Right. So, ending up with a career in the arts is not my temperament, and the sort of roller coaster of it is still a little harrowing.
That is an amazing story, because you wouldn't expect that, from a science guy, chemistry to the creative world. And I think that probably prepared you beautifully to go, well, I'm going to give this a shot, but I always have kind of this to fall back on, so to speak. I'm not saying classically you had a plan B, but you got the smarts to know, well, I got a Harvard degree. There are other things I can do if this just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right?
Although at a certain point you get old enough that, like, it's too late. I guess it's never too late. But
it's never too late. Yeah. No. All right. As we begin to close, there's one thing I always do, and I know you're an avid fan of this show, and you watch it religiously, so you would know this. I end each show asking my guest their best piece of writing advice, because I have so many listeners and viewers, both YouTube and podcast, that probably 97.543 percentage, if you wanted to be analytical about it, that begs to hear that best advice. So what is Matt Quirk's best piece of writing advice? Plenty of lead up for that.
Writing advice is to get away from the computer, because it's so intimidating to sit down and try to write your story. So I will, when I'm figuring out the whole plot of a book, because I'm an outliner, I'll just kind of wander around, look like a crazy person, or walk at the cliffs here, and let it all fill in. And then once I figure it out, then I go write it down. And then at the micro scale, when I'm writing a scene, I just kind of wander around until I picture what's going to happen in that scene. Then I make some voice notes. And then I sit down at the computer, and then I write it down. Because I just get caught up moving words around. And then more generally, this is 2 pieces of writing advice, is to do the shitty first draft, they call it.
Right.
Because there's so much kind of stage fright and perfectionism, and the whole thing of writing is a head game. So to just give yourself absolute permission to write it out as rough as you want, and then know you can fix it later. And so if you combine knowing, like having really spent time making sure the whole thing will work, with taking the pressure off yourself by letting yourself write a rough draft of it, then you have a super rough but probably like structurally sound draft, and then it's just revision, and you can relax a little bit because you have the pages.
I love that, Matt. And I'll tell you why I like it. You do something that I do similarly, and I don't like it because it's similar to what I do. Excuse me. But it's that, and I think you started out perfectly with it. Sometimes when you start with that blank page, it's intimidating. You're like, oh, where am I going to start? And that little cursor is just blinking at you if you're on a computer.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm with you. If I have a random idea, my favorite thing in the world is to walk, preferably along the beach, and just walk. The exercise of walking just frees you up, or driving. That's my second favorite thing to do, is you just drive, because this is taking care of one side of your brain. And you can just kind of toil on the other side. And then, and here's the funny thing. People will say, oh, I got to write it down right away. How many times, this is somewhat rhetorical, sometimes partly inquisitive, because if I have a great idea, or you have a great idea, I bet you don't forget that idea. You're like, oh, that's interesting. It sticks in your brain. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah. Stephen King has some good stuff on this.
Yeah. But don't you agree? Because like if I'll have an idea, okay. And it just locks. Now, I can't tell you what I had for lunch yesterday, but I can tell you what that idea was 12 years ago. So that walking and that introspection just allows you to kind of work out the kinks. So then when you sit down, you feel the confidence is kind of built up for you, whether you're going to write it longhand or type it. So I love that, Matt.
And what I had, which was a real problem for me, coming from math and physics and chemistry, was the idea that there was a right answer.
Right.
And that you could do things schematically, formulaically. So in my first English papers, in my first books, I thought there was a process and a solution. And I now know that the process is like wander along and let the folds in your brain do their bizarre, sedimentary, whatever they do to ideas. And then at the end, you'll have the right answer. I was not ready for that. And so I spent a lot of years kind of struggling, thinking I could just move words around on a page. So I hear you that like the weird misto things that your brain does when you're just walking or just letting an idea gestate, that's how it works. And that's all there is to it. You just need time and you need focus, which is really hard for people to find. And when you're walking, you're not like trying to perfect it on a computer, and you're not, hopefully not dicking around on your phone.
Yeah, hopefully not dicking around on your phone.
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
Just say no to dicking on the phone. What I especially like about that is that you said this, you're giving yourself permission. I don't want to belabor the point, but you're giving yourself permission to just, oh, that didn't work. Oh, that didn't work. Oh, I can see why that doesn't work. And I think that's a lot of it. Just give yourself permission to F it up a little bit.
Yeah, and also like if you're spending a lot of time just thinking about things, you don't have 2,000 words as you were trying out whether this guy should have, been attacked by a bear when he was young or whatever.
Right.
And so it's easier everything's faster because you're not attached to these things you've already written and invested in.
Right. And sometimes you'll write. Go ahead.
Well, and the rough draft is the same way, because you'll go back and you'll reread the whole thing and you'll be like, this character doesn't work. And and this is just for me. If I had written that character and been like weeping at the beauty of all these lines I wrote with that character, and then all the polishing and my turn of phrase and then I have to go back later and just cut that character, I'm not psychologically or emotionally capable of that. But if it's like, hey, I threw that up in an afternoon and it was fine, and reading it now I realize like the hero doesn't need two people they're trying to save, then I can get rid of it. So that's, it has advantages coming and going, I should say.
Yeah. Hold for passing plane.
Yeah, that's the point.
Yeah. I'm just picturing you, man. I'm just picturing you weeping over the keyboard. This is so
I get emotional. I get emotional. And sometimes it's for great stuff. And the worst thing is when you write something like that and then you give it to your agent or editor and they're like, oh, that was flat. That was really flat. And you're like, I was in tears. And it's just because you get, and this is why it's so subjective and sometimes things don't work, you're so close to it. You're literally sharing subjectivity with these characters. You're in their mind that you've completely lost perspective.
Well, this has been a great time, Matt. I'm looking at the clock. I'm running a little bit late. I got a little pressure situation, so let's go ahead and ring off here. But I want to say, folks, if you want to learn more, visit MatthewQuirk.com. You'll see it here on the screen. Follow him on Twitter as I do at mquirk, and he's on both Instagram and Facebook at the same place called Matthew Quirk Author. Matt, thanks so much for showing up.
Thank you. Yeah, this was a blast.
Imagine a vehicle that doesn't just take you places, but transforms every journey into an adventure. Introducing Rivian's all-electric R1T pickup and R1S SUV, where innovation meets the call of the wild. With up to 850 horsepower and a tri-motor powertrain, Rivian's R1 vehicles accelerate from 0 to 60 in just 2.9 seconds. So whether you're navigating city streets or exploring off-road trails, Rivian delivers unparalleled performance. Inside, experience the perfect blend of luxury and durability. With an EPA estimated range of up to 405 miles on a single charge, Rivian keeps your adventures going longer. And now, with hands-free highway driving capabilities, your journeys are as effortless as they are exhilarating. Starting at only $69.9, the Rivian R1T offers exceptional value for those ready to embrace the future of driving. Electric adventure vehicles designed for wherever your spirit leads. Visit Rivian.com to explore more.